Hey everyone, welcome to our presentation on garden path sentences entitled Your Brain Just Took the Wrong Path, starring Sabrina and Cotton. And we will see Sabrina. So meet Sabrina. Sabrina is a cat who recently learned how to read English, and most of the time she does this pretty well. But every now and again she comes across a sentence such as this. When Sabrina first reads it, she naturally assumes that Anna is dressing the baby. But then she gets to the end of the sentence and suddenly thinks, wait, what? Even after reading it again, something still feels off. The sentence seems simple, but her brain is getting confused. So, what Sabrina has just experienced is called a garden path sentence. These sentences trick your brain into following one interpretation at the beginning before new information forces you to stop, go back, and rethink what the sentence actually means. So, when Sabrina first read the sentence, her brain assumed the baby was the thing being dressed. But that's not what the sentence is saying at all. The correct interpretation is that Anna is getting dressed herself while the baby is playing in the crib. Sabrina's brain just jumped to a conclusion too early, and that's exactly what garden path sentences do to the brain. So now that Sabrina knows that humans can write sentences that trick your brain, let's see how she handles the next example. All right, Sabrina, have a go. Yeah, so Sabrina's confidence didn't last too long. When most people read these sentences for the first time, they have exactly the same reaction. Our brains automatically treat old man as the noun phrase, meaning an elderly person. But in this case, man is actually being used as the verb. The sentence isn't describing an old man at all. So the sentence actually means the old people operate the boats. And once you know the correct interpretation, it makes sense. But getting there requires your brain to completely rethink what you thought the sentence meant. So Sabrina's had a few tough examples, so we're going to give her a break, but she's created a few examples of her own to give to the audience. So best to read these examples in your head first and backtrack, see if you have to go backtrack and reinterpret them a few times. Also, feel free to pause the video here if you need to. Here we go. So if any of these were confusing to you, or as mentioned before, you had to go back and reread them one or two times before they made sense, congratulations. You've just gone down the garden path. But off the top of your head, can you create a garden path sentence? It's quite a fun exercise. And here's Cotton to explain further. So when you read a sentence, your brain doesn't patiently wait for all the information. It actually constantly predicts what words and sentence structures are coming next. Most of the time, these predictions help us understand language incredibly quickly, but sometimes your brain commits to the wrong interpretation too early, and then it has to backtrack and rebuild the sentence meaning. So you kind of right, Sabrina, your brain is speedrunning language. It does it exactly fast, and it becomes a bit overconfident. But all these examples have made Cotton a bit tired, so we're going to give her a break. But just remember, garden path effects aren't just weird word Jedi tricks. They happen because human language is naturally full of ambiguity. And here's a few examples of where you might go down the wrong path in everyday life. Confusing news headlines, badly punctuated text messages, misleading clickbait titles, subtitles that briefly seem wrong, or sentences in movies or TV where the characters misunderstand each other. And this can be especially true when native languages or opposing languages are involved. The garden path effects aren't limited to psychology examples either. A poorly written headline can accidentally lead readers toward the wrong interpretation before they've had a chance to process the full meaning. And that's one reason why wording and punctuation is surprisingly important. So let's give Sabrina a break for a hot minute and get into the science and talk about something called parsing. So, what's actually happening in the brain? When we read or listen to a language, our brain automatically organizes words into meaningful structure, and like psychologists call this parsing. In simple terms, the brain is constantly asking who's doing what to whom. But the brain doesn't wait for the entire sentence before making a decision. Instead, it makes rapid predictions about what the words and sentence structures are actually trying to come to next. Most of the time, these predictions help us understand language incredibly quickly. And the remarkable thing is this all happens almost instantly. By the time you've consciously understood a sentence, your brain has already made countless tiny decisions about grammar, context, or meaning. And just so to summarize, our brain's combining things like grammar, word meanings, and context. A lot of high level things to build meaning in real time. It's pretty amazing. But sometimes we get the sentence structure a bit wrong. And when this happens, the brain has to stop, backtrack, and reinterpret the sentence. And we call this reanalysis. But then we move on to something called syntax and how it works. So syntax simply means the rules that determine how words are arranged in a sentence. And the brain uses syntax to quickly decide how words relate to each other. So let's revisit the first example now that we know how these garden path sentences kind of work. So the brain initially assumes the baby is the object of dress, but later information reveals that the interpretation was wrong. So why do garden path effects happen in the first place? Well, our brains are designed to be fast and efficient. Most of the time, making quick predictions is incredibly useful because it helps us keep up with conversations and read fluently. But garden path sentences take advantage of those systems by encouraging the brain to make the wrong prediction. They effectively lead the brain down the wrong path before revealing the correct interpretation. So this is where psycholinguistics comes in. It's a scientific study of how humans understand and produce language. Garden path sentences show us that language comprehension is not a passive process. Our brains are constantly predicting meaning and sentence structure as language unfolds. And when those predictions turn out to be wrong, the brain rapidly reorganizes understanding and builds a new interpretation. That's why Sabrina got confused in the first place. But does this work in conversation too? Absolutely. This helps conversations flow naturally and quickly. But fast prediction can sometimes lead to misunderstanding, like mishearing song lyrics, misunderstanding voice messages, confusing headlines, especially when someone reads it to you, and assuming someone meant one thing when they meant another thing. But why should we care about this? Well, garden paths are actually very, very useful for scientists and researchers in understanding how the human brain works, like understanding how humans process language, how reading works, how why misunderstandings happen, and how the brain balances speed and accuracy. They also help researchers study things like attention, prediction, memory, and decision making during communication. So before Sabrina goes back to practicing English, let's recap the key ideas really quickly. Your brain predicts meaning before a sentence is finished. Reading is an active process rather than simply decoding words one by one. The garden path sentences exploit these predictions and trick the brain into taking the wrong path. When predictions fail, the brain reanalyzes the sentence and searches for a new interpretation. And although that can occasionally lead to confusion, these shortcuts are actually what allow us to communicate so quickly and efficiently in everyday life, even though they do occasionally leave someone like Sabrina a little bit confused.